Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, September 4th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a lot of predictions today for Week 2. We're going to get into kind of the early slate early on. We'll get into Texas at Michigan to start things off. A very straight-up matchup, it seems, right now, but that makes me very nervous to pick it. Then we'll get into the battle for the Cyhawk Trophy, Iowa State, Iowa. Want to give that one some love. Always a really fun game, and I'll give my pick for that one. Then we'll do 3 picks all in one segment. We'll get you to Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Tulane, Georgia Tech against Syracuse, a ton of big-time games, and I just want to kind of pile all those in, all in the noon slot on Saturday. Then we'll get into where are the double-digit upsets this week. In Week 1, it was 58-2, double-digit favorites getting the win, but there could be some this upcoming weekend. A little bit harder to find, but there are a couple that I want to highlight for you. And then we just have some questions coming out of Week 1. A ton of questions around Florida and Clemson and Florida State and a number of different things that I want to get over for you guys before we fully head on into Week 2. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the Tip and Donation link at the bottom of the screen, or to use that super chat that you have. You can see that little $ at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network channel. Utilize that if you'd like to. You can just click on it, add any question or comment you'd like, and your name and question will pop up on the screen. Always a great way to make this a little bit more interactive, so absolutely love that. And you can always use the GSMCpodcast.net link if that's a little bit easier for you. But definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that if you have any question or comment. Let's jump in, because Texas at Michigan is one of those games. It's one of those games that everyone is looking forward to this Saturday, and the Jersey matchup is going to be incredible. 2 iconic programs going at it in Ann Arbor this weekend, and it's going to be a tough one to pick. I can promise you that. This is one that, when you look at it at face value, when you watch what happened last week with both these teams, everyone wants to go Texas, and I've seen a number of people go Texas in the past couple of days. It makes me very nervous about this one. Everyone in Week 1 has so many different things to say, and they have so many different opinions, and so many that are definitely overreactions in one way or another. So you watch that Michigan game on Saturday, and you see Will Johnson have to have a 90-yard pick six to make things look a little bit better for Michigan. And you're thinking, this offense can't get it going. They don't have the guys that they had a year ago, especially at quarterback, and Texas is going to be able to come in here and absolutely roll, especially what they did to Colorado State, just absolutely dismantling them from start to finish. But this is where you get got. This is where a lot of people get got in college football, where you think you know what one team is, you think you know what another team is, and then they walk onto the field, they strap them up, and they play against each other, and it looks a lot different than what you're expecting. So this is one that I'm very nervous about, at least to pick, because you never really know which way this one's going to go, and you have 2 teams that are going to attack very different ways. Obviously, Michigan's going to be a little bit more run-heavy, try to slow down this clock. Texas is going to take their moments. Now, they are a little bit more of a short-passing team, so not quite as shot-heavy as some of the other teams, but at the end of the day, they are going to be a pass-heavy team. They are going to try to stretch you out and see what happens on the other side. So this is a scary matchup. There's no doubt about that. I think Texas knows that. I think they're going to come in ready, but this is one that they're going to have to be very careful about. But I do want to get in some players, some watch, then we'll get into some stats before we get into all of the details of how each of these teams can win. And I want to start with DeAndre Moore, the wide receiver from Texas. He was maybe the only wide receiver on the roster that did not get a catch on Saturday, but this is a very talented kid. If you remember Jordan Whittington from a year ago, he's playing in that position, the slot position for Texas, and very talented route runner, really good hands, and one of those guys that is one of the best blockers on the team, so maybe that was a big-time reason he didn't get the ball too much on Saturday, but this is a very talented kid, and one that can get loose at any moment, so he's one of those guys that maybe you're not, circling him when you really go into this one. You have Isaiah Bond, you have Jonte Cook, you have a million different guys to talk about, but DeAndre Moore just might make a couple of plays that totally change this game. And then David Benda. This was the most remarkable player for Texas in Week 1 by a mile to me. When we watched that game, that guy was flying out of a cannon every single time. He took really great routes for run run stuffing, absolutely nailed a couple of people and sent them backwards. He is huge for this game because every now and then they're going to break through that defensive line. That's just a inevitability with this Michigan run game, and you're going to have that linebacker ready to meet him. So him and Anthony Hill are going to be absolutely huge in this game. Max Bredesen is an interesting one because I don't think he's going to go for 25 carries, 150 yards, or anything crazy like that. But I do think he's a very capable player. I think he's a guy that could hit a block that gets Donovan Edwards loose on the edge. Or he could be just another good set of hands for Davis Warren that are close to him that make it a little bit easier for him to get into this game. So I'm not saying Max Bredesen is going to be the story of this game, but he might just have a play that totally changes the complexion of it. And then on the back end, Zeke Berry is playing nickelback for Michigan and a very, very talented player. He's going to have his hands full on Saturday. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's DeAndre Moore or one of the tight ends that he's guarding, he's going to have to make sure he's ready to roll because Texas is going to spread the ball out a ton. Will Johnson's going to be incredible, and he's going to hold down that spot on his side of the field. You need to make sure the rest of this back end is ready to go because Texas is not going to let you zero in on one guy and let Will Johnson just dominate this game. I can promise you that. So it's going to be incredible to watch all of these players go to work, but I also want to get into some stats that you guys are going to want to watch because there are a number that are going to be really, really interesting. Texas is 4-1 against the spread in their last 5 games. Has been really, really good. 7-0 straight up in their last 7 road games, so includes that Alabama game a year ago where they played just so well and were able to walk out with a win. Michigan has won their last 20 straight home games. They're 28-0 in August and September since 2015. Just been on an absolute tear. And if you've been watching Michigan, that is no secret. But this line was around 3 before this weekend. So it gives you an idea of how much people can kind of overreact to 1 week and see just how far things can go in one direction after 1 week of football. But is going to be a really tough one. I'm not going to lie to you. This is a very tough one to pick, but let's get into how Michigan can get this one done. First of all, you just got to establish the run early. You have to make sure Donovan Edwards, who only had 27 yards rushing a week ago, it was really only Khalil Mullings and then every now and then Alex Orji making plays for them in the run game. You have to make sure that's not the same on Saturday because the reality is Davis Warren is not going to go out there and win you this game. He's not going to go out there and make spectacular plays over and over and beat a team like Texas. What he can do is execute the offense, but he's not going to be able to do that if they can't get a run game going, if they can't push those linebackers back a little bit and allow him to get those passing windows that they very much need. So getting the ball to Donovan Edwards, making sure this offensive line that was not necessarily all that good last week and definitely makes some Michigan fans a little bit nervous for this week, get them moving forward, get them comfortable in that run blocking scenario, and then maybe you can take advantage of this Texas interior defensive line that did really well on Saturday, but this is a totally different beast that you're facing here. So going to be really interesting. I think when you look at Texas, the interior defensive line is where you can attack, and I expect Michigan to do just that. On the other side of the offense, you got to get Davis Warren comfortable. There's no two ways about that. You have to make sure that Davis Warren is getting the ball out quickly, getting it to Tyler Morris, Kendrick Bell, Colston Loveland over the middle of the field, making sure that they have every ability to get the ball to the receivers most importantly, because only 5 players caught a pass, and the leading wide receiver on Saturday had 15 yards. That cannot be the case on Saturday if they have any chance to win this game. I understand Colston Loveland is a downright special player, and we'll talk about him in a second, but at the end of the day, they need wide receivers to step up, because if they can't, Texas is going to be able to stack the box and just absolutely suffocate the run game. So going to be really, really tough, but at the end of the day, getting Davis Warren comfortable will give you at least a shot to keep this Texas defense on its heels and a little bit off balance. And then keep Texas one-dimensional. If you can keep Texas as a passing team and not a rushing team, you are in really good shape, because I don't care how good Texas is. I don't care how many receivers they have on the outside. When you can drop 7 or 8 in coverage and feel good about what you can do against the run, you have a lot of different chances to win games, especially against a team that has so many speedsters out there that thrive on the amount of space. Shutting down that space is as much as you can is what you want to do. So Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant need to make sure, Jayshon Barham as well, need to make sure that they are huge against the run on Saturday, because if they can, then that RPO game that Texas absolutely loves and could cause real big issues for Michigan on Saturday, or the play action game that is just downright beautiful from start to finish. All of those things would be kind of negated. Obviously, Texas would have some success from time to time, but if you can't run the ball, you're not going to be scared about play action, or you're not going to be scared about Quinn Ewers handing that ball off on that RPO. So you take an entire part of Texas offense just out of the equation, then you have a real shot to win this game, and then you have Quinn Ewers possibly forcing the ball into windows that are just a little bit too tight. But then, moving over to Texas, the biggest one to me is spread the ball out and let Quinn Ewers cook. There are a couple of games in Quinn Ewers' career where he's had to play on big-time stages. It was incredible what he did at Alabama a year ago. It was the best game that I've ever seen him play. And then against Washington in the CFP, it was a little less clean from a completion percentage standpoint, but still played really good football, missed a couple of big-time moments. But at the end of the day, this guy has played in big-time games. He knows what it's like to walk into those environments and try to get a win. So I don't think there's a part of Texas that's going to really flinch up on Saturday. Now, maybe there's a different type of ideology around this team from last year, but when you have Quinn Ewers, when you have a lot of the offensive linemen they had from a year ago, when you have some defensive linemen that weren't the starters on that team but were absolutely on that team, you have that energy in your locker room. Not only that you can go up and compete with this team, but you've done it. You've been able to walk into Alabama and get a double-digit win. Who's to say you can't do it up in Ann Arbor? So that's the confidence that Quinn Ewers has, and I think putting the ball in his hands is the best way for Texas to go about business pretty much all season, but especially in this game where you're going to have to be able to lean on the pass game just a little bit more. You still want that run game to get going, obviously, but Quinn Ewers is your biggest asset. Utilize him to the nth degree on Saturday because he's the most comfortable choice they have on that offense, at least when it comes to pass or run. But then slow Colston Loveland. When you looked at what happened last week with Michigan, no one else played good football other than Colston Loveland when it comes to pass catchers. He is the best pass catcher on this team, and that is not the ideal scenario. I can promise you that. But to be fair, he might have been last year. Or Roman Wilson probably was last year. But at the end of the day, they need more from their wide receivers. When targeting Colston Loveland on Saturday, they were 8 for 9, 87 yards and a touchdown. When targeting anyone else, they were 7 for 16, 31 yards and 1 pick. So it's an entirely different game. If Texas it has the ability to put Jalen Gilbo at the nickelback position, or maybe pull over Jahdae Barron to play on Colston Loveland, and then you bracket him over top with a safety, it's going to be really hard for Davis Warren to fit it into those areas, and especially if he doesn't love his wide receivers, he's going to try to fit into those areas, and then you get mistakes. So I think that's the big-time thing is make Colston Loveland a relative non-factor. You're never going to be able to stop that kid. He's 6'7", he's incredible. He's downright awesome. But at the end of the day, being able to put him in precarious situations where he's bracketed by two guys and Davis Warren has to make a decision is going to be the way that Texas gets some turnovers on defense and totally changes this game. And then finally, run the ball creatively. Texas is not necessarily in a position where they feel super confident in their run game as of right now. Obviously, C.J. Baxter and Christian Clark going down have a big part in that, but also, they just don't necessarily have the depth they want to have to be able to run in between the tackles all day against a front like Michigan. So the way you do it is end arounds, jet sweeps, pitches, anything to get this speed out on the outside. And this offensive line, if you have watched them, they do a really good job of run blocking when someone is pulling downfield. They don't do a good job of run blocking just straight up in zone because they can't get their feet behind them, they can't get their body moving, and that's when offensive linemen are really, really scary. So I do think this is part of just what Texas is going to need to do. Pull guys on the outside, get people out on the outside, and let your speed go to work. So it's going to be incredible to watch that, and I think if Texas can run the ball creatively, get on the outside, and let their speed just be what it is, they might just have a really good shot to get this one done. And then some matchups to watch just really quickly. The Michigan D-line against the Texas O-line might just decide this. If the Michigan O-line dominates the Texas O-line, or if the Michigan D-line dominates the Texas O-line, then this Texas run game cannot get going. It might be a long day for the Longhorns. And then the Texas wide receivers against the Michigan secondary. And this is less about Will Johnson and what he can do because he's going to be incredible. I feel pretty confident in that. But you have to find everyone else. If you can find Jair Hill on a one-on-one matchup with Isaiah Bond, if you can find Zeke Berry in an uncomfortable matchup with DeAndre Moore, whatever it is, making sure that you find the matchups you want and spread the ball out to all of these wide receivers, you're going to have a lot of success. And then finally, the Texas front seven against this Michigan run game is huge. If the Texas D-line and those linebackers who played incredibly well against Colorado State but have a totally different beast in front of them this weekend, if they can play well and stop this Michigan run game, there's almost no world where Michigan can win this game. So Michigan has to win that matchup if they want a shot, because if Texas stops them cold in the run game, they are in trouble. I can promise you that. But my pick for this game, I am going to take Texas. I'm going to fall into the trap, and I feel like on Monday I'm going to be talking about how I probably shouldn't have overreacted to week one, but Texas looks really, really good. And I think Michigan has so many questions on offense. I still don't think they really know who they want to be their quarterback. I think they prefer it to be Alex Orji, but he's not executing at the level that they need him to. So it's a lot of different questions up there at Michigan. I do think Texas gets this one done 27-13 and continues moving on, gets that big time win away from home like they did a year ago, and then you figure out what happens with Texas going forward. As for Michigan, this is one that should not deter what they can do this upcoming season, but they got a lot of things to figure out. There's no doubt about that. So I am taking Texas. I'm not taking Michigan. I am falling into the trap of, buying into a team that played really good in week one and not buying into the team that didn't play really good. But to be fair, going into the season, I tended to believe Texas was going to win this game in a kind of Alabama-Texas fashion. So I'll stick with that for the time being. This one went a little bit long, so we'll try to speed things up from here on out. But at the end of the day, let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Cyhawk Trophy. We got to talk about Iowa State, Iowa, a really fun game every single year, and if I didn't cover it, I'd be doing you guys wrong. So I want to make sure I get to that right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of a lengthy review of the Texas-Michigan game. I am picking Texas in that one to win 27-13. Feel very, very iffy about that one, but at the end of the day, that is what I'm going with. And now we got to talk about the Cyhawk Trophy. If I wasn't going to talk about this one this week, then I was not a college football fan, because this is one of the best games of the year. It is ugly, it is a rock fight every single time, and I love it every single time. So, cannot wait for this one this upcoming weekend. This one's at 3:30, so went a little bit beyond the noon slate, but we'll get back to it in the next segment. But Iowa favored by 2 points. Let's just get to the graphic here, why don't we? Iowa favored by 2.5 in this game, over under 35.5, as you can imagine in a game like this, but this one's really fun. There's no doubt about it. Iowa State had a very gross performance against North Dakota this past weekend, but North Dakota was really able to slow the clock down. They had a 12-minute field goal drive, which was outright crazy to watch. But at the end of the day, there is a ton to like about this Iowa State team. 3 really, really talented wide receivers out there. And on the other side, Iowa has an offense. At least through week one, they have an offense. They had 3 wide receiver touchdowns last week. They had 6 all of last year. So they're kind of flying on offense, at least in terms of Iowa standards. But at the end of the day, this is the Cyhawk Trophy game. This is the game that always is a rock fight. I tend to expect the same thing, but maybe we get a couple more points this upcoming year. But let's get into players to watch here. Oh, excuse me, I apologize for that. Let's get to players to watch here. Eli Green, a transfer over from North Dakota State, very talented kid. He actually got to face his old rivals in North Dakota this past weekend. This is a really, really talented kid. Everyone knows about Jaden Higgins. They know about Jalen Noel, the two really, really good wide receivers on this team. They need a counterpunch, and it's going to be this kid. Isaiah Alston from Army is another guy to watch. Shout out Isaiah, one of my buddies, so a little connection there. But Bo Freeler is another guy I want you guys to watch, a safety for Iowa State. This kid can fly around, and he plays really smart football, one of the big-time high IQ safeties, and there are a couple others on the other side for Iowa as well. But at the end of the day, this is a huge-time player, especially against someone like Cade McNamara, where maybe you can get a mistake from time to time with him. And then moving on to Iowa, Reese Vanderzee put on a show in week 1. I believe had 5 catches, over 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he's a freshman. So it makes you feel very confident about what Iowa can do going forward with this kid. And I think it's about getting the ball in that kid's hands as early as possible, because you're at home. Everyone knows this kid's name. He's the hot name on the block right now. If you get the ball in his hands early, the crowd's going to be into it very, very quickly. And we'll get to that in a couple of little slides here. But Aaron Graves is the other guy I want to talk about. He was dominant in their week 1 performance. Obviously, played not so great of a team, but at the end of the day, was an absolute force. I believe had 3 sacks in that game, was just all over the place. So this is one of those guys where if Iowa State does not come prepared, if Jared Hufford, the very talented left guard for Iowa State, is not ready to take on this challenge, they're going to be in trouble. We saw last year Jared Hufford did not play very well against Tavondre Sweat. Maybe another really talented defensive tackle can take advantage of him this time. But I like to think that this is going to just be one of the most fun battles that we won't talk about too much. But Jared Hufford against Aaron Graves is a very, very interesting one to watch throughout this game. Excuse me, I apologize. I want to do stats to remember real quick. A couple of stats to remember. Cyclones have won 7 of the last 8, so they've been on a little bit of a tear. And then Iowa State is winless when intercepting no passes. So if they can get Iowa to turn over the ball, they got to feel really confident in what they can do on the football field. But if Iowa stays clean, if they can keep Cade McNamara safe, then they're in really good shape overall. As a 2.5-point favorite, Iowa has gone 3-5 against the spread, so has not necessarily been all that pretty. And then on the other side, as a 2.5-point underdogs or more, Iowa State has been 3-3 against the spread. So definitely a little bit better, all things considered, roughly around where you think they would be, being a 2.5-point spread. Because as I've said on here before, I think anything in between like 4 points and down isn't really an upset. It's pretty much of a toss-up game, especially in college football. And then 2 of Iowa's games out of the 14 it played last year went on the over in the point total. So as you can imagine, with an Iowa game, you might just want to go to the under. But I might just give you a reason to go over later on in this. But let's get into how Iowa State can win this game. They're obviously away from home. They got to do some different things to make sure they come out on top. And the biggest one to me is let Cade McNamara beat you. We know what the Iowa run game is. We know that Caleb Jackson is a monster. We know that physical offensive line is going to be a problem to deal with. We also know Cade McNamara has played inconsistent football in the past. I think he has made big-time strides, and he's looked really good. Obviously, last week looked absolutely awesome, but this is a totally different beast. And I think the best way to do it is say, we're going to sell out on the run. We are going to make sure that Caleb Jackson is not the player that beats us. And then if Cade McNamara throws for 400 yards and hits every single spot and does everything they want him to do, you live with that and you move on. But at the end of the day, if you're going to pick your poison in this Iowa offense, if you're going to decide which way you want to go, you definitely want to stop Caleb Jackson and then allow Cade McNamara and these receivers to have their shots. Because then on the back end, you have Bo Freeler, you have Jontez Williams, who are really good players and played great on Saturday, that absolutely can make those plays. So I would just make Cade McNamara beat you. Sell out on the run, make sure that that's stopped. But at the end of the day, make sure that that guy, number 12, is throwing the ball, and then just pick your spots. Get a couple of big-time takeaways, and a player that has been known to give you some takeaways if you can get those throughout Saturday, then you're in really, really good shape if you're Iowa State. And then find the run game. Last week, it was not pretty for Iowa State in the run game. 3.9 yards per carry. Abu Sama, who should be one of the just linchpins of this offense, only had 36 yards on the ground. They have to get that going a little bit stronger, and Iowa State's O-line has a good interior. Jared Hufford is a very talented player at left guard, but Iowa's front is very stout as well, with Aaron Graves and with all of the Brian Allen, another really talented player. So they're going to have to figure some things out, whether it's getting Abu Sama out on the edge and letting him work out there, whether it's using Rocco Becht a couple of times on the read option play, which I very much think they need to do in this game. But at the end of the day, some way, somehow, you got to find more rushing in this game, because then those receivers on the outside that you want to get the ball to are not going to have nearly enough space against a very good secondary. And that's the other part of this. Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, they are going to be the best offensive players on the field by a mile on Saturday. They are remarkably talented players, and getting the ball in their hands as early as possible is the way you want to go about business. This Iowa back end is downright incredible. Sebastian Castro, Xavier Nwankpa, they make so many big-time plays on that back end, and if you're throwing the ball 10, 15 yards downfield, that's just more time for Sebastian Castro or Nwankpa to make a play, and you do not want that. So getting the ball into Jalen Noel's hands on a drag route 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, or Jaden Higgins on a curl 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, and just letting them make the plays they can with their legs is probably the best way to go about business. And then you have guys like Eli Green, Isaiah Alston that can absolutely make a play. So a ton of really talented wide receivers, but the best way to go about business is just stay as far away from that secondary as long as you can, and then see what happens, see if they can break a couple of tackles and take one to the house. But moving on to Iowa, how can they win this game? First of all, go the opposite direction of what I just said for Iowa State. Keep Cade McNamara's confidence really high, and it comes back to make sure that everything is really comfortable, especially in the first 15 scripted plays. It's got to be really comfortable. It's got to be, running the ball with Caleb Jackson, then getting a couple of play action where you release him out to the right and he does a nice little easy pass to a tight end or a running back to get him 5 yards. It's got to be really comfortable stuff early on, and then maybe you can open up. But at the end of the day, this is a player that has had trouble with that confidence level, has had trouble with, making sure that he's in a position to make all of the plays and feel confident to make all of those plays. Getting him going in a game that is going to be very intense, that is going to be loud, that's going to be wild, is going to be huge for this team. So if they can make sure that he is confident after that first drive and feels great about his game going into the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, they're going to be in really good shape offensively and possibly be able to make a number of other plays in the pass game that they were able to make last week. And then keep Abu Sama out of this game. I know I just talked about how he really struggled in week one. That doesn't mean this dude isn't as dangerous as anyone on that Iowa State team. Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins are downright special. Abu Sama's not too far behind him. This dude can make so many different plays, whether it's coming out of the backfield, making a catch, whether it's running in between the tackles, outside the tackles, making linebackers miss. There is not a matchup that you can put on Abu Sama and feel really confident in. Now, they have a couple of really good linebackers over there at Iowa with Jay Higgins and I'm blanking on the other name. I very much apologize. But Jay Higgins is a very talented player, and I tend to believe he's going to get a lot of Abu Sama on Saturday. So keeping that guy in check is absolutely huge. Figuring out a way to make sure that he doesn't make that big-time play along with Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, you're going to be in really good shape. And this defense is very good at taking people out of games, so I would expect to see a lot of Abu Sama trying to get the ball, but then a lot of those linebackers just flying to the ball and trying to make sure that he does not get anything after the catch, which will be a really, really fun thing to watch. If Abu Sama gets going, this is a very, very hard offense to stop. But then the biggest one to me is start fast. You're at home. You have fans excited about this new offense that just put up a ton of points through the wide receivers for the first time in probably forever. It's a rivalry game. Get on the board early. Iowa, if you're the Iowa head coach going into this game, if you're Kirk Ferentz, I'm saying confidently, we're taking the ball first. I want to be able to possibly even take the air out of the ball just a little bit with Caleb Jackson, run the ball, wear down this Iowa State defense from the jump, and then get in the end zone, and then have this entire crowd just come to life. And then you have Sebastian Castro and Xavier Nwankpo walking on the field with them at their back, and Jay Higgins and all of the other talented players on this defense for Iowa. You have all of them walking on the field with the crowd. You have all of them walking onto the field with the 12th man behind them. So that's something that I think could be huge, is if Iowa can get on the board in their very first drive, if they take the ball in their very first drive and go down and score, this crowd might be hard to stop the rest of the day, and Iowa State is going to be fighting an uphill battle. So I do think that's kind of the way to go about business. Take that ball, go down and score, and then get this crowd really buzzing in Iowa City. And then matchups to watch. Iowa State wide receivers against the Iowa secondary is the obvious one. When you have Jalen Noel, when you have Jaden Higgins, and then when you have Sebastian Castro and Xavier Nwankpo on the back end for Iowa, it's going to be incredible to watch this unfold. Whether it's the matchups or just how well people tackle, all of the different things that go into this, it's going to be so much fun to see this unfold. And then Iowa O-line against the Iowa State D-line. We know that Iowa wants to run the ball. That's the way they go about business. If Iowa State D-line can hold their own, they don't need to win this battle by any means, but if they can hold serve, if they can put themselves in a position to stop the guy with 2 yards gain instead of 5 or 6 yards gain, they're in a really, really good shape. And then, again, the Iowa State O-line going up against big-time players on the Iowa D-line, whether it's Aaron Graves or Brian Allen. Keeping Rocco Becht safe is the biggest thing in this game, because this guy is so dangerous in every single sense of the word. If you can keep him protected for 3 seconds, it's either going to be a wide receiver open downfield, or it's going to be him being able to take off and make a big-time play with his legs. So keeping him upright for as long as possible and then letting some of that magic unfold is the way that they're going to want to go about business. I can almost promise you that. And I hate picking this game. This is one of those games that you toss it up in the air. Every rivalry game is always a little bit crazy, but this especially is one that I just have no beat on every single year. But I'm going to pick Iowa State. I put it on the wrong side. I apologize. I have Iowa State winning this game. I totally messed up this graphic here, but Iowa State I have at 24. Iowa I have at 20. I do think Iowa State has enough to get this one done. I think the wide receivers are very, very talented and a little bit of a barn burner in the Cy-Hawk Trophy, at least in terms of what they've done in past years. This would be downright a shootout, I can tell you that. So I did get this wrong. I apologize. I do have Iowa State beating Iowa. Maybe this is sending me a sign that I should be picking Iowa, but I'm going to pick with Iowa State. I'm going to stick with them, and I do think the Cyclones get it done for the 8th in the last 9 meetings between these two teams. But very, very fun game. Every time I see that one in week 2, I get a little bit excited because I know it's going to be a little bit ugly. I know it's going to be a little bit of a rock fight, but that's why you sign up for Iowa State. It's always really, really fun, and although I messed up the graphic there, I do have Iowa State winning that game 24-20, and we'll see what happens. It's always so much fun for that game, and one that holds a lot of weight over there in Iowa, that is for sure. But let's take our second break here, and we're going to get back to predicting some games. We got to get to Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Tulane, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, a couple of big-time games in that noon slate that we just got to get on your radar, and I got to pick. So we'll get down to that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. We have Iowa State. So much fun every week 2 of the college football season. I do have Iowa State winning that one 24-20. If you check out that segment, I did mess up the graphic on that one. I have that flipped. I do have Iowa State winning it, but at the end of the day, going to be a really fun game, and maybe the graphic was trying to send me a sign that Iowa might just win this one, but I'm going to stick with Iowa State for the time being. But let's jump into the rest of the early window. We have a couple of games that I want to break down for you here. Arkansas against Oklahoma State. We have Kansas State against Tulane. We have Georgia Tech against Syracuse, a ranked Georgia Tech against Syracuse. So I want to get into all of this. A ton of really, really fun games in that early slate, and I think for me, it's got to start with Arkansas-Oklahoma State. This is one of those games that I have very little beat on. This is two teams that are obviously coming in from two very different directions, but Arkansas looked really good. That offense looked absolutely flying, and Taylon Green looked like the quarterback that they very much wanted them to be. But at the end of the day, both these teams are going to run the ball. Ollie Gordon and Jaquindon Jackson, along with Taylon Green, are going to be huge parts of this game, and definitely whoever can stop those groups of people the best, they're going to be the ones winning the game. You know, if Jaquindon Jackson ends with less yards than Ollie Gordon or less yards per carry, you feel pretty confident about Oklahoma State, and then vice versa the other way. So going to be really fun. A little bit of an under-the-radar game with Texas-Michigan on at the same time, and I understand that, but this one's going to be really fun. I wouldn't be surprised if we turn this one on late in the third quarter and we had a 7-4-point matchup. So cannot wait for this one, and a couple of players to watch here. Luke Haas, I can't quite get that one down, but I believe Luke Haas, a very talented tight end for Arkansas. This is a guy that I think is really important in this game for one very simple reason. He's somewhat of a linebacker neutralizer, and when you look at the linebackers on the other side of the field for Oklahoma State, they're downright incredible. Nick Martin is awesome. Colin Oliver, who plays a little bit more of an edge rushing role, but drops back into coverage from a time or two. It's going to be huge to keep those guys as far out of the game as possible. You're never going to stop them completely, I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, if you can get this guy over the middle of the field and then open up running lanes for Jaquindon Jackson, or open up passing lanes for some of the other talented wide receivers, hopefully Andrew Armstrong gets in on this game. It looks like he's kind of on the edge of questionable, maybe probable, but we'll see what happens. If he's on the field, it might totally change the complexion of this one. But Luke Haas feels like a guy that I think might just be able to change this game in kind of a nuanced way, just taking Nick Martin just out of the box and making sure that he has to worry about something other than stopping this run game for Arkansas. Landon Jackson, the other guys I want to watch, he might be the most talented player on Arkansas, bar none. He had 6.5 sacks, 44 tackles a year ago, and did really, really incredible things. So this is your game breaker. This is the guy that Arkansas needs in this game, because there is a quarterback on the other side that has been known to give up the ball a time or two. And if you can get to him a couple of times and possibly force that big-time fumble, this game changes on a dime. I talked about how close I think this game is going to be. That means one defensive play could totally change everything, and Landon Jackson might just be the guy to make that play. Rashad Owens is outright incredible. 3 catches, 81 yards, a touchdown in week 1, almost 900 yards in 2023. He's the guy that gives Ollie Gordon space. He's the guy that you can spread the ball out, make sure that this defense for Arkansas has to be a little bit more spread out. And if that's the case, Ollie Gordon is just going to eat throughout this game. So got to get Rashad Owens going early, and then you might just be able to roll this run game to the finish. And then Nick Martin. This is one of my favorite players in all of college football. 10 tackles, 1 sack in week 1, 140 tackles in 2023, just outright ridiculous. This is an elite athlete. He does remarkable things at the linebacker position, and I can't imagine he's going to have any other job other than make sure Taylon Green does not get loose. Make sure that guy with elite running ability is not the one that beats you. And then Jaquindon Jackson as well. So he has his hands full on Saturday, no doubt about that, but he's going to be running down Taylon Green a ton, and if he can keep him in the pocket or at least keep him behind the line of scrimmage, they're going to feel really, really good about what they just did. So Nick Martin, if you have any counter to what Taylon Green can do with his legs, it would be Nick Martin in the middle of that defense. An absolute beast, and someone that, one way or another, is going to have his fingerprints all over this game. But moving on to keys of the game, Arkansas, we just talked about it. Taylon Green's legs have to be a huge part of this game. He has to be the game changer that lets them overcome some of the issues they have in physicality and experience and all of the different things that they don't have the edge in. Those can be taken away with an athlete like this. He is so dynamic. He is such a difference maker that if he can get out and run and make 70, 100 yards in the run game, it's going to be really hard for Oklahoma State to really get a beat on this offense. And then for Oklahoma State, limit Alan Bowman's errors. Keep them as under wraps as you possibly can, because he was very clean a week ago. He was very, very good. No picks, no turnovers at all. But going into a game where you're playing an SEC opponent, there are some really good players. Dwight McLaughlin is an awesome corner for this Arkansas team, and if you make that one big mistake, it could be the difference in this game. And then for both of them, dominating that line of scrimmage is going to be huge. Both these teams want to run the ball, and if they can win that line of scrimmage, then they're going to be able to run the ball and likely win this game. But as for my pick, I am going to go Oklahoma State to win this one 37-28. I do think it's going to be kind of a fun game. I think Arkansas is going to be able to get loose a couple of times, but at the end of the day, I do have Oklahoma State getting it done on their home turf. Moving on to Kansas State at Tulane. Kansas State favored by 10 points right now. It's been slowly rising just a little bit, over-under at 48.5, and this one's going to be really fun. Both these teams kind of do really interesting things in the offensive game, whether it's running the ball really creatively, getting multiple guys involved. It's going to be really fun to watch these offenses go to work. And then obviously Avery Johnson is the guy that you want to watch. He's the most talented guy on the field on Saturday and can do some really, really incredible things, but does struggle to throw the ball. So maybe Tulane can get a couple of openings here and there and make a big-time play in this game and totally change it in a second. But Tulane does have a couple of power 4 level receivers in Mario Williams, in Keith Brown, that we'll talk about actually right now. He is the player that I want y'all to watch very, very closely. He is an absolute burner. He's one of those guys that he can change a game in a second, and you're going to need to do it probably a couple of times if you're Tulane to win this game, because this is a guy that can totally just take a top off a defense, and if he does that, then this crowd that you have behind you is going to get into this game, and that could be a total game changer as well. Kansas State going down to Tulane for this one is one of the bigger storylines going into this game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Jalen Geiger, I know he's wearing a Kentucky jersey, could not get one with him in a Tulane jersey, but very talented kid coming over from Kentucky. And he's one of those guys that he's really, really instinctual. He plays the game really smart, plays the game really, really in a veteran style. And I think when you look at Avery Johnson, there's going to be wayward passes. There's going to be a couple that get away from him and just don't go exactly the way he wants to. If he can make those plays, if Jalen Geiger can make those one big plays where he's tracking a ball and can make a pick, it's not necessarily the strength of his game, but a very talented player nonetheless. He could definitely make those plays, and especially has that veteran ability to kind of read the eyes of Avery Johnson and make that play a little bit earlier than some others would. So very much like this player, and I think he might just be the player on the defensive side of the ball that totally changes it for Tulane. And then Dylan Edwards. It's hard not to include this kid for Kansas State because last week, 5 carries, 43 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 19 yards, and a touchdown. The guy is incredible, and he is the absolute Swiss Army knife. So another game-breaking guy that you have on this in this group and in this game, which has a ton of them, to be totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, the group there is some group of 5 guys that just aren't going to be able to keep up with this kid. He's going to make a couple of them look goofy on Saturday, and maybe he breaks one for a touchdown. And then VJ Payne is someone I want to talk about, a very, very experienced safety for Kansas State. 4 tackles in week 1, 57 a year ago. This is a very complete player. He can play in the run game, does really well in coverage. I think he's someone that if you don't have all of your ducks in order, if you don't have that quarterback position exactly how you wanted to figure it out with Darian Mensah over there at Tulane, this is a guy that's going to make some plays. This is a guy that's going to cause some problems and maybe just make that one big play to seal the game for Kansas State. But the keys are almost the exact same as what you saw for Arkansas, Oklahoma State. Kansas State needs Avery Johnson's legs. They need to be able to get him out on the edge and show how dynamic this run game can be. It was really good a week ago. It can be even better on Saturday. They're just absolutely remarkable, and I think Avery Johnson might just be able to open this thing up a little bit more. For Tulane, give your guys space to work. You have really talented wide receivers on this team, whether you're talking about Mario Williams or Keith Brown or Shaz Preston, who I don't know if he's playing right now. He might be battling a little bit of an injury, but at the end of the day, very talented wide receivers over on that side. They have so many different guys that can make plays. Getting them space to make those plays is going to be huge. And then for both of them, who can make that big play, whether it's offense or defense? Who can make that play that totally takes one team out of it or gets them all the way back into it? So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one, but I do think it comes down to one play, but I also think that Kansas State stretches it out just a little bit. I think Kansas State has one huge play maybe early on, midway through the fourth quarter, and then gets a garbage time touchdown to make this one look a little bit better. But I do think this is going to be a really fun game, and Tulane is a team that, I have them in my playoff, and I have no reason to not think that as of right now. Maybe this weekend will give me a reason to not think that or feel really confident in that pick. But moving forward here, we're going to keep it moving a little bit. Georgia Tech going to Syracuse is a very interesting game. This is a ranked Georgia Tech team that I have some questions of why they are ranked, but that's beside the point. Georgia Tech is -3 in the Carrier Dome. Syracuse coming off a great performance last week against Ohio, and Kyle McCord over 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, only one mistake late in that game, so feel very confident. Then on the Georgia Tech side, you could go 3-0 walking out of this game. You could be 2-0 in conference play, and then you're heading to a game against VMI. So hypothetically, you could be 4-0 heading into Louisville for a top 25 matchup in a couple of weeks if they can get this one done. So a huge matchup for Georgia Tech, no two ways about it. And the player to watch for me is Amari Harvey. This is a guy that I absolutely love. I could not be higher on this kid if I tried, because I think his ability is so incredible. It's so dynamic. He does so many things on that back end, is a much better tackler this year than he was a year ago, but he can make plenty of plays on the ball. He's very, very good ball skills, and I think when you look at what Kyle McCord was able to do a week ago, very, very impressive. I think I would bait him into that again this weekend. I think I would dare him to beat us this upcoming weekend and then see what happens on that back end. See if you can make a couple of plays. Now, Kyle McCord is not one to make a lot of mistakes, especially throwing picks, but maybe you can get him from time to time, and I think this would likely be the guy to do it. And then I want to talk about Avery Boyd, kind of an under-the-radar guy for Georgia Tech with all the wide receivers and running backs they have at their disposal, but 5 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown last weekend, was a very, very talented guy for Georgia Tech. And I think when you look at this team, they love to do the RPO game. They love to get the quarterback game going. They love all of that. If you can employ a tight end, a really confident tight end in that game plan, you're going to feel really good. You saw it with Brett Seether last year. He got injured going into this year, so Avery Boyd's going to have to pick up the slack, and I think when you have all of these talented wide receivers on the outside, having a tight end that can split the difference up the middle of the field is a total game changer, and I think Avery Boyd might just be that guy. On the Syracuse side of things, Fadil Diggs might be the best player on the football field on Saturday. He is a remarkable edge rusher that came over from Texas A&M, had 8 tackles, 2 sacks in week 1, had 4 sacks all of 2023, so he's making his way up. That is for sure a very talented player, and if you can blow up that RPO or Georgia Tech run game, especially with Haynes King, you're going to have a really nice day, and this would be the guy to do it for Syracuse. So him getting off the edge very quickly, dominating that left or right tackle is going to be huge for this game, and I think he's more than capable of doing it. I can almost promise you that. And then Zeed Haynes is someone that I really like. A transfer over from Georgia, had 4 catches for 70 yards in week 1, and he has game-breaking speed. He is a guy that if he can take the top off one time, get the Carrier Dome into this thing, then it might be hard for Georgia Tech to find their way back. This is not a team in Georgia Tech that is all that good at coming back from big-time deficits. So if you can get Zeed Haynes or a couple of these other big-time wide receivers out on the edge quickly and get a couple of big plays, maybe Georgia Tech's fate has been sealed early on in this game. Moving forward, the keys to the game: Syracuse, control Haynes King. If you can keep Haynes King in that pocket, if you can make sure that he is standing still and not getting out on the edge and not making his legs a factor in this game, you feel really confident about where you sit. I can promise you that. And then for Georgia Tech, bait Kyle McCord. He's really confident coming off last week, but that doesn't mean a mistake cannot come. They are rare with him. He's very, very good at taking care of the football, but there are moments to be taken. And if they can take one of those moments on the defensive side of the ball, they're in really good shape, and that's the big-time key for both these teams. You might just need one big defensive play in this game. Both are really, really good offenses and are going to lean on that very aggressively throughout this year. If you can just make that one play, whether it's Amari Harvey or Fadil Diggs for Syracuse, they can make those big plays and possibly change this game. But at the end of the day, the team that I think is going to end up coming out on top is Georgia Tech. When I watch this Georgia Tech team, it's no longer a team that I think is super variable. It's no longer a team that I think could play really well one week and then fall off a cliff the other. I think they're going to be really complete pretty much throughout this year. And I think they're going to be able to play these games where Syracuse is roughly around the same level as Georgia Tech. I think they're going to be able to outcoach them, and I think they're going to be able to make those big-time plays that they were able to make against Florida State down the stretch. So I expect Georgia Tech to go up to Syracuse, get that win, go to 2-0 in ACC play, and be sitting in a really good spot as they head into what is a terrifying back end of their schedule. So a lot going into this upcoming week. The early slate, that noon slate, is really, really fun, so wanted to break those down real quick. But now I want to get into all of the upsets that did not happen this past weekend, where they could possibly happen this upcoming week. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about a couple of the other games going on around noon. We had Arkansas, Oklahoma State. We had Kansas State, Tulane. We had Georgia Tech against Syracuse. Three really, really good matchups that might be a little bit under the radar, with Texas, Michigan going on at the same time, but some really fun ones that you're going to want to tune into. But now I want to get into where were the upsets last week. After week 0, where we saw Georgia Tech really just take Florida State to the woodshed, although that score was a little bit closer. They just absolutely dominated that game. After we saw that, it felt like week 1 might just follow suit. It felt like we might just get a couple of crazy upsets throughout this weekend. We got 2 of them. We got Vandy beating Virginia Tech. That was really fun. We got Boston College on Monday, kind of saving us a little bit with a big-time win over Florida State. But at the end of the day, double-digit favorites went 58-2 this past weekend. I don't think that's going to happen this weekend. Now, I don't know where these are going to come, because it's not very easy to find these. But at the end of the day, I'm going to cover about 7 games here, I think, and I feel like one of them is going to go away that we're not expecting this upcoming week. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and I'll start with Troy against Memphis. Memphis is in a very, very typical spot that you find a lot of these teams in, where you're coming off a game where you played just very clean football, did what you needed to do in week 1. You're going into a game against Florida State that is huge. There's no two ways about that. You're going down to Tallahassee against a Florida State team that is struggling right now about as much as you possibly could struggle. You have every ability to win that game, and you really want to. And I think there's a reality where they could be looking ahead to that game just a little bit. And this Troy team is very, very talented and has the ability to take the air out of the ball the way that they need to win this game. Damian Taylor, very talented player, had over 100 yards last week against Nevada. Very explosive, can do a ton of different things in the run game. So if you can get this game slowed down, if you're Troy, and if you can get this game down into the 20s and 24-20 or something like that at the end of the day, you got to feel pretty good. And Memphis, if you come just a little bit not prepared for that big time, or for this game with that big time game against Florida State coming up, it might just be a little bit closer than people are thinking. And Gerard Parker, a very talented coach that was at Notre Dame last year but took over for Troy this year, he's looking for his big-time signature win, and it might just be this weekend where Memphis is looking just a little bit too far forward. Moving forward, Baylor going up to Utah for a conference game? No. For some reason, this is not a conference game. We saw this, we're going to see this a couple of times in the Big 12 throughout this year. I believe Arizona at Kansas State is another example, but this was one that was set up before that Utah joined the Big 12, so they're playing this out as a non-conference game, which is probably pretty good for Baylor, all things considered, because this one likely will not go their direction, but maybe it will. Maybe this is where we see that big-time upset. Utah is favored by 14 points in this game, but Daquan Finn is one of those guys that can just totally change a game. His offense by himself, I've said this probably a million times at this point, but very talented guy. Did have 2 picks against Tarleton State a week ago, so cannot happen this week if they're expecting to beat Utah. There's no doubt about that. But for me, it's more about Dave Aranda. I think you're looking at this offense for Utah, and they have so many guys, and they have Cam Rising back healthy, and all of these different incredible things going on over at Utah for that offense. But Cam Rising is still coming back from a year-long injury. He's still not exactly where you want him to be if you're Utah, just in general. if Dave Aranda can get to him, if Dave Aranda can confuse him a couple of times and maybe they get a pick or two, or maybe they get a big sack on 3rd and long, whatever it looks like, they can possibly make some things happen in this game that people do not expect. So I like Utah in this game. I do think they probably win it. But at the end of the day, Baylor is one of those teams that, with Dave Aranda coaching defense and Daquan Finn on the other side of the ball, they are capable of a lot of really special things this upcoming year. South Carolina heads over to Kentucky to play a game, and this is kind of like that Texas-Michigan game in a way. You saw South Carolina look downright clunky against Old Dominion. Frankly, there are a lot of reasons to believe they should have lost that game, but they were able to come out with a win. Kentucky, on the other hand, just rolled. They did incredible things. The Bush Hamdan offense looks really confident right now, and we'll see what happens. But the big equalizer here for South Carolina is Dylan Stewart. This guy is incredible. He was dominant in week 1. This is a freshman edge that is just electric and can totally blow up a game. And then you have Kyle Kennard on the other side. Both of them combined for 4 sacks and 6 tackles for loss on Saturday. So a ton of confidence of those two coming off the edge. And if you can rattle Brock Vandegrift just a little bit in his second full start as the Kentucky quarterback, maybe you get a couple of mistakes. So South Carolina obviously going in a very, very bad direction right now. Maybe they rebound in a big way and get a big-time win in Lexington. Cal is heading to Auburn this week, which is a very, very interesting matchup. Auburn favored by 13 in this game. 53.5 is the over-under, but when I look at this game, there are a million reasons to like Auburn. After what we saw a week ago, it was just incredible offensively. But the big-time thing I keep coming back to is California is going to have the best player on the field on Saturday. They are going to have Jaden Ott on their team, and that kid can do things that are downright special. He was a little dinged up against UC Davis, still had 2 touchdowns, and is probable for Saturday, so I expect him to be totally fine, be on that field, and I think he's one of those guys that is impossible to fully stop. What they can do is slow him down. So that's kind of the way that Auburn's going to have to go about business, because Cal's going to live and die by Jaden Ott. I can promise you that. They do not have a ton of other options out there that can really compete, at least at an SEC level. So Jaden Ott's going to be the guy a lot in this game. And I think when you look at Auburn, they're playing with a lot of confidence. Cal is coming in with, a ton of questions all across the field, and Peyton Thorne felt very confident going into last week, threw a ton of really, really good balls, but maybe you can get to him a little bit more. Maybe you can make those windows just a little bit smaller, and then the Peyton Thorne that has been showing himself the past couple of years might just come out a little bit more. So definitely will be interesting to watch, and we'll unpack that one after it. I think this one is one where, unless Jaden Ott is downright special, Cal's probably in a really tough position this upcoming week, but definitely one to watch in that 3:30 slot. Moving on, South Florida, Alabama is one that we just got to talk about, because I have a stat that I came across on Twitter a couple of days ago that I just cannot get out of my head, and it's a little bit of a ridiculous stat. It's one that might not fully apply to this team, but I really love it. The last 5 Alabama head coaches have lost to a Group of 5 team in their first year. This is the last Group of 5 team that Alabama plays all year. So whether it was Nick Saban or Don Shula or all of the other coaches that came before him, Kalen DeBoer they have a bit of bad history. I'll put it that way. Kalen DeBoer has a bit of history going against him in this game, but at the end of the day, this is not the same Alabama team that was in the past 5 iterations. Let's just be totally honest. Nick Saban totally changed this program, and the talent level on that side is just outright ridiculous at this point. So it's definitely one that I'm a little bit out there on a limb for. But you do have a guy on the other side in Byron Brown that's an equalizer. He's a guy that can totally change a game and make one where you have talent all over the field on one side of the field, and then you have another team that is totally outmatched physically, but you have that one guy. You have that one guy that can make all the big-time plays that you need him to make and take the team on his back. So maybe he breaks loose for a 40-yard touchdown. Maybe he breaks loose for a 60-yard touchdown. But at the end of the day, USF is going to run the ball. They ran the ball 2/3 of the time on Saturday. So if Alabama can stop the run game, then they're in good shape. If they can't, then Byron Brown might just be able to have his fingerprints all over this one. Moving forward, we got to talk about App State. I feel like if you can't talk about App State when they're playing a Power 4 team, you're not doing something right, because this is the team. This is the team that everyone watches whenever they play those big-time games, because they've wreaked some havoc, that is for sure, including last year against Texas A&M, but there's no way Clemson can come out of the game they just played in Atlanta and play this poor of football, right? There's no way that they're going to be able to walk out there and lose to a group of 5 team, especially after what happened in Atlanta. But at the end of the day, on the other side, App State and Joey Aguilar are really dangerous. They have a number of running backs they can throw at you. Kanye Roberts, a very talented running back, really, really good player. And I think this is one of those games where if Clemson can just get leaned on the same way they were against Georgia, obviously not going to be the same level of leaned on, I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, maybe there's a couple of openings, and that's all that App State needs. They need their defense to play really good football, but then they need Joey Aguilar to just make a couple of plays down the stretch of this game to change it, and maybe they can get it done. I wouldn't necessarily bet on this one. These last 3, I'm getting a little bit over my skis, but at the end of the day, I think this is a really fun game. And then whenever App State plays a Power 5 team, you just have to feel like that's an upset alert, no doubt about it. But moving on, Boise State goes up to Oregon, and I feel like a lot of people are starting to circle this one just because of what happened to Oregon a week ago. A lot of people are looking at this one as maybe a little bit closer than people think, but I'm a little bit skeptical. I want this one to be a little bit of an upset. I think that would be really, really fun and obviously shake up the college football season. But at the end of the day, this is an Oregon team that missed by not too much on Saturday. There were definitely some issues, and I don't love that O-line that if Boise State can't exploit, then they're going to be in a little bit of trouble. And if Dylan Gabriel can't throw the ball down the field, then they're going to be in a lot of bit of trouble. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at some of the things that happened last week for Oregon, they're very fixable things. They're things that likely are more circumstantial than anything else, and I think they're going to be more than fine. But if Oregon finds themselves in those situations again, if they miss a couple of field goals, if they get a couple of turnovers on downs, then this team with Ashton Jainty on the other side is going to be able to take the ball down the field very slowly, run the clock, and make it really tough on this defense to just keep up for 4 quarters. So I don't necessarily think this one is going to fall into this category. I'd be a little bit surprised if it does, but when you have Ashton Jainty on one side of the field, you're capable of doing some really special things. I can promise you that. So we'll preview all of these games in a little bit more depth throughout the week. I can promise you that, just making sure that you guys know where I stand on them before we go in. These are ones that I'm just watching grandiose. Not necessarily saying I'm picking any of these upsets, but there are a couple that I think are really interesting, particularly that Cal game going to Auburn. I think that one's a little bit more interesting than some people are letting on. But college football tends to find that middle ground between chaos and normalcy, and last week it was a lot of normalcy. And I think this week we could have quite a bit of chaos, and maybe it happens up in Ann Arbor where a lot of people think Texas is going to win that game. Maybe Michigan pulls one off, but we'll figure out where it comes from at the end of the week, and we'll see just how right I was on some of these different picks. But at the end of the day, let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we have some questions coming out of week 1, heading into week 2. Where does everyone stand? Is the ACC just Miami and everyone else? And a number of other questions that I'll get to right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the potential double-digit upsets this upcoming week. We had a pretty straightforward week 1. You tend to find that water finds its level in college football, so maybe we have a little bit of a crazy week this upcoming one. But at the end of the day, let's get into some questions that are lingering following week 1 heading into week 2. And the biggest one I have is it the ACC, and is the ACC Miami and just everyone else? Is Miami just that much better than all the other teams in the ACC? And I think a lot of this comes down to what all the other teams are going to do the rest of the season, obviously. Florida State has already buried themselves. I'm done talking about Florida State when we talk about the ACC race, just plain and simple, I'll be honest. If they earn their way back in, then maybe I'll talk about them. But as of right now, they're nowhere close. But then Clemson did not look like Clemson on Saturday, or at least the Clemson that I remember. The Clemson that everyone remembers in the 2010s, that was not them. I can promise you that. So it does not look like the team that we've come accustomed to. It looks like another year where they might just be a little bit disappointing, but they could definitely turn some things around. Have a very talented defense, have a lot of different things. So if I was going to peg a team that would be able to meet Miami at those heights, it would likely be Clemson. But then on the other side, you have NC State, SMU, Virginia Tech, all of the preseason dark horse picks in this conference played really rough early on. They did not play good football in week 1, especially Virginia Tech, obviously getting that loss to Vandy. But at the end of the day, you do have a couple of teams out there. Louisville did look the part early, had a dominating win in their first game. Georgia Tech is playing really good football. I don't necessarily think they're going to make a run just because of that schedule, but they're doing some really good things and just taking it week by week over there. They have a couple other teams. Syracuse possibly could make a run, but at the end of the day, Miami is setting the pace out there, and it looks like they are a little bit far in front of the competition. So we'll see what happens, but at the end of the day, as of right now where we sit, it looks like Miami is just going to run away with this conference. Obviously, that's likely what's not going to happen. We'll likely get some other team that throws their hat into the ring, but man, it looks like everyone's playing for a distant second right now in the ACC. Is Billy Napier's fate written is another question that I want to ask, because this is a very tough one to wrap your head around. Because coming into this season, everyone felt like there was a quiet confidence around Florida, and I bought into it, and I very much apologize for getting anyone else on that bandwagon if I did, because it was really ugly on Saturday. I can promise you that. And I think when you look at Billy Napier, there are a number of different questions here. When do you fire him? How does it affect the entire team? You brought in 2 really talented kids in LJ McCray and DJ Lagway this past cycle. Are they gone if Billy Napier's gone? So there are a ton of different questions around this. But at the end of the day, you can't be Florida and walk out and have that performance on Saturday. You can't be flat. You can't be unprepared and just downright weak in that game. So it was embarrassing. There's no other way to put it. And I think when you look at this, a lot of this has to do with the fans. A lot of this has to do with just the fact that the fans are relatively done with this. You saw it on Saturday. When Miami started really rolling on Saturday, you saw the Swamp just slowly start to deteriorate and do it pretty early on in that game. And I think it was just the reality of this offseason where you're trying to buy yourself into Billy Napier can turn it around. There's more talent on this team. They have the ability. Graham Mertz is a quarterback that is comfortable in this offense. You have all of these different things that you're trying to convince yourself of. But once you see it on the field, it's very quickly for all of that stuff to fall apart. So I'm not saying he's going to be fired tomorrow. I'm not saying he's going to, be absolutely buried and he's absolutely done, but anything other than a dominating win over Texas A&M in a couple of weeks and maybe continuing on from there and getting a couple of wins you shouldn't have, I don't think he has a shot. I'm having a hard time finding a path for Billy Napier, at least with this team that he put out on the field on Saturday, to find his way even to like the end of October, the middle of October, frankly. If they play that Tennessee game and get taken to the woodshed, I would be not surprised at all if there was a pink slip on his desk by the Monday morning. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one, but as of right now, I'm having a hard time talking myself into Billy Napier being the head coach of Florida after this year. Moving forward to Dabo, we got another question. Does he change his ways after this season? Obviously, he's been the no portal guy, and he's been very steadfast in that. And while I very much respect his stand of standing on this is the way I'm going to go about business, this is the way I want to go about business, and this is the way that I think we can go about business, he was wrong, just plain and simple. I really respect the principle stand. It doesn't mean it's not the wrong way to go about business. This team needed wide receivers, and he knew that. They needed running back depth, and he knew that. They needed linebacker depth. They needed O-line help, and he knew all of that. those things could have been fixed in the portal. And it's not like this team would have been leaps and bounds better. It's not like they would have, totally torn apart Georgia in week 1. I promise you it wouldn't have been that ugly. I promise you if they had a little bit more running back depth behind Phil Maffa, if they had more receivers to throw the ball to, if they had linebacker depth behind Barrett Carter, they would have the ability to make those plays down the stretch of that game to at least keep it close and make that game an actual Georgia against Clemson, not what looked like Georgia against Purdue or someone like that. So it was really, really ugly on Saturday, and I think it's one of those things that Clemson could turn it around, go to the ACC title game, and then everything is forgiven, and Dabo just continues on his way. But I just don't think that's going to happen. But frankly, even if Clemson falls off a cliff this year, even if they go 8-4, 7-5, and things are really, really ugly, I think Dabo is Dabo. I genuinely think that even with all of the pushing from the outside, even with all of the forcing to go into the portal, I don't think he's going to do it. I think the more likely scenario here is that he might just hang him up at the end of this year if everyone's pushing him in one direction that he does not want to go in. He might just hang him up and go do TV. I know that sounds crazy with how much he loves coaching and how long he's been in the sport, but as of right now, he has no inclination to go into the portal, and I can't imagine that really anything is going to fix that at this point, especially after the last 2 years they had. If he was going to flip that switch, I feel like he would have already done it. But maybe my reading on that is wrong. Maybe he would definitely jump in at the end of this year, and if he doesn't, I can almost promise you that this is going to continue for Clemson for as long as they don't do the portal. But moving on to Mike Norvell, where do they go from here this year and beyond? How do they kind of bounce back from this? Because it's going to be an ugly year. This is a bad team. There's really no other way to cut it. And a lot of that is on Mike Norvell. I've talked about that in the past, but these players just are not Florida State level players. There are a couple out there. There's Patrick Payton, there's Shaheem Brown, there's a number of players that are good. There's no doubt about that. There are a number of players that will play NFL football on this team. They are not a good team collectively. They just aren't. The portal was not good enough to them this past little bit, and their high school recruiting has not nearly been good enough for them to feel confident in the depth behind those portal pieces. So I think there's a lot of different things going on here. I made a prediction a little bit ago that I think this season is going to dictate the portal a lot going forward and how much people lean into it, how much people lean away from it. Florida State's making a really good argument for people leaning away from it. So I do think that's something that's going to happen more and more. I think Mike Norvell is going to change some paths this upcoming offseason, and I've seen some people talking about him being on the hot seat this year. He's not. He could go 5-7. He'd still be the head coach at Florida State going into the 2025 season. I can almost promise you that. But he does have to make some changes. There's no doubt about that. He is a very, very capable coach. One of the top 10, 15 coaches in the entire country. But he's got to change his philosophy just a little bit. You can't lean on the portal this aggressively and expect to be a team that's in contention every single year. The teams that are in contention every year are the teams that build out that foundation through high school. So I think Mike Norvell is plenty fine. I think the season's going to be really ugly throughout the rest of it, no doubt about that. But I think at the end of the offseason, he's going to be able to slowly start making some of those changes that are going to need to be made for this team, and then they'll likely be fine over there in Tallahassee long term. This year, strap in. It's going to be really, really ugly. But then on the other side, then Mike Norvell can really get to work on rebuilding this program the right direction. So will be interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, I expect some pretty aggressive changes in roster construction going forward for Florida State. Then let's roll through these last couple because I'm going a little bit long here. But who had the most impressive performance in week 1? We had a couple of records broken with Ashton Jainty and Tatoria McMillan doing just ridiculous stuff. Nico Iamaleava put up ridiculous numbers. Jackson Dart put on a show. Travis Hunter is the best player in the country by a mile. Just absolutely remarkable. Carson Beck, Drew Aller, Miller Moss all had great performances along with Garrett Nussmeier. But there are a million different options. The guy that did it was Cam Ward. It was remarkable to watch this kid go to work on Saturday. And I understand this Florida team might not be quite as good as we once thought, but man, they are going to work. This is a really, really talented team. And when you see what Cam Ward did on Saturday, if you can make a Heisman moment type play on Saturday, he did it. In week 1, I know that sounds crazy, and I tend to believe that the Heisman race really takes shape around week 6, but plenty of guys that started their campaign off nicely, and Cam Ward is definitely the leader as of right now. So cannot wait to see what he does going forward, and he might just be the guy that steals the show in the entire college football season this upcoming year. moving forward, what coordinator made the biggest impact on their team in week 1? Because there's a lot of different options. I had Andy Kotelnicki written down at first. I think it might be DeAnton Lynn. What he did for USC's defense in week 1 against an LSU offense that is going to be really good is really impressive. They did a really good job of not missing a lot of tackles. Guys were playing with way more aggression. They were meeting a really good offensive line for LSU at the point of attack and pushing them back. It was really impressive. And frankly, I was outright wrong about this team doing what they needed to do. And then on the other side of things, I think Andy Kotelnicki did an incredible job up at Penn State doing just remarkable things with an offense that looked downright stagnant before. And then, Anthony, you make a great point. Shannon Dawson did work this weekend, did an incredible job. Bush Hamden over at Kentucky. There were so many incredible jobs this past weekend, and cannot wait to see what a lot of these guys do. But at the end of the day, it's going to be so much fun to watch these offenses and defenses change throughout the years, and especially that Andy Kotelnicki Penn State offense. I just cannot wait to see. So, the most disappointing team this past weekend, I think this is a tough battle. There are a number of options. When you look at Clemson or West Virginia or Florida or Texas A&M, there are a number of teams that absolutely got embarrassed. But when I look at this, there are so many different ways I could go. I could go to Florida. I could absolutely go after Florida. And frankly, I'm realizing I forgot to add this Florida State slide. The answer is Florida State. What they did on Monday was downright gross. I don't know why. I don't know how it happened. I don't know what the conversation was going into that game. I don't know what those players' mindsets were. Whatever it was not nearly good enough. Florida State played really, really ugly football, and although I don't have a picture for them, they were just gross. So they are absolutely the team that had the most disappointing performance in week 1, but it's going to be really interesting to watch them develop over the next little bit, and all of these teams that had disappointing runs in week 1, maybe a couple of them turn around like Clemson or West Virginia, but Florida and Florida State, I would be a little bit surprised if they were able to turn it around. But overall, I think there's a number of things to take away from week 1. Let me get to Anthony's question here really quick. Is Michigan in the middle of a rebuild with a new coaching staff because the coaching staff is running the same? So that's a big question, right? You know, how much has really changed around Michigan? Is it the status quo that they had around Jim Harbaugh and they're just continuing business, or are there changes that are going on behind the scenes? I think there are quite a few changes. I do think that philosophically, on the field, they're going about business the same way. I still think they're going to be a run-heavy, physical team, but behind the scenes, they're recruiting from high school way more often. They're being much more aggressive in that form. I think they're just building a team differently. I don't think the identity is different on the field, but I think when it comes to building this team out from a talent perspective, it's just a little bit different of an approach. So overall, I think the identity on the field is the same. The identity off the field has been a little bit different under Sharon Moore. And then between Dawson and Goodry at Miami, who do you think will have a bigger impact last weekend? Frankly, I think it was Lance Goodry. I understand that, what they did on offense was downright remarkable, and there's no doubt about that. But I gotta say, I thought this Florida offense was going to be able to keep Miami off balance. I thought they were going to be able to go at the secondary just a little bit, and they were not able to, not even a little bit. It was absolute domination, and I was really impressed with what Lance Goodry was able to do with a lot of new pieces in that back end and a lot of new pieces on that front end. He was able to get pressure all day, even with Ruben Bain going out. So, although Shannon Dawson went to work this past weekend, I think Lance Goodry was as impressive, if not more. But that'll do it. I'm running very long here, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. But thank you once again for listening, and we will be back for even more Week 2 breakdowns. Colorado, Nebraska, Tennessee, NC State, all tomorrow. So definitely tune in tomorrow for that, and I will see you guys then.